I'm going to shortly get off the stage, and I'm going to invite Susan Zhang, the Vice-Chancellor's Fellow at the Trobe University and the colleague of Theo Farrell, to come and join me at this lectern. And I'm really hoping that in San Diego in the USA, a good friend of mine and of all of ours, in Paul LeBlanc, the former president of Southern New Hampshire University, is still there, ready to join us with a live cross by Zoom from the USA. Can we switch and hopefully see Paul, the unmistakable image of Paul LeBlanc. So please make him feel welcome, and please make Susan welcome as they come and join and interview Paul in a fireside chat from the stage.
Well, good evening, Paul. How are you? We can't hear you. It's good to test. Anyone can read your lips and translate? We need AI technology for this. Can you try again? I think you are mute. You are muted still.
How's that?
Oh, that's much better.
Oh.
Hi.
That was a very 2021 moment, wasn't it?
Thank you for letting us reliving that. Well, I'll kickstart the session. I'm very curious. On your LinkedIn, you have a new job title called Chief Bottle Washer. What's this role about?
Well, I was president at Southern New Hampshire University for 21 years, and then a couple of things happened. So one was I sort of left to start this new venture, which I suspect we'll talk about, Susan. But the other, much more important, is, and you can call us up on your screen for them, the birth of our first grandchild, who lives in San Diego, which is why we're in San Diego a whole lot more. So Simon is the kind of new center of orbit in our life. He's 8 months old now, and
wow.
I spend a lot of my time bottle washing, taking care of him. I thought they had a photo queued up because I was saying, look how cute he is. Oh, right, that's a great moment. He's a hefty little bundle, but yeah, so that's the joy of our life, and that's the Chief Bottle Washer title on my email.
Well, congratulations on the promotion, I think. Sounds like you really enjoyed it. Just like you have been the president of the Southern New Hampshire University for the past 20 years, which you grew the student from just 3,000 on campus to more than 175,000 online, markets the most fastest growing university in the country. How did you achieve that?
Yeah, it's actually 250,000 now when I left in June.
Yeah.
And so we continue to grow. It was, there are a number of things, lessons, and I was just doing a chapter for colleagues in New Zealand who are writing a book. But when we think about scaling online, and I had to sort of sit back and reflect back on the stages, there are a couple of things. So one is, and it's probably the least sexy and interesting part of the story, but in those first years, we had to really revisit all of our business processes, get under the hood, look at our systems and our policies. A lot of that was built for a residential face-to-face campus, and we were serving adult learners who had kids and jobs. Our average learner in online was a 30-year-old with a full-time job and 2 kids, maybe had done service in Iraq or Afghanistan. So what did they need from us? And it was very different. And that was the first and most important part. It was really changing our policies around that. I could give you lots of examples. Let me give you one real quickly. If a student was transferring to us from a traditional university, we would ask them to go over to their registrar's office and get copies of their transcripts, certified copies, and send them to us. If I'm talking to an adult who works till 5 o'clock, and I haven't been in school for 10 years, and it's like, what's our registrar again? And then they call and the office has been closed for an hour, and it just didn't work very well for them. So we changed our policies such that we would chase down their transcripts for them. We paid the $10 fee, and all of that was automated. So it made it very easy for them. So these are kinds of, again, they're very practical things, but very practical things, our systems and our policies are often get in the way of learners. Second thing I would say is that we get very, very focused on a concept that came out of Clay Christensen's work at Harvard Business School, which is called jobs to be done. And his question was, we often, in higher ed, I think is particularly guilty of this, we are a supply-side minded industry. We create programs, dream up programs. We think, oh, there's a need for an X, or I think we should create a Y. We see some data about jobs and workforce, and we create these programs, and then we put them out there and we market, and we hope students will come. And Clay's argument in Jobs to Be Done was that we really should be demand side minded, which is whoever we think we are going to serve are going to give us their resources, whether it's their time or their tuition payments, however, whatever they're giving us. They have a job they want to get done with us. So you could argue in the United States, and the surveys and polls are very clear about this, they come to us for a degree, but the job they want done is an economic opportunity. The job they want done is a job, is a career. And when we looked at our adults, when we looked at our campus students, a lot of the job they were asking us to do is what I would call coming of age. Like the American residential campus experience is a lot about growing up. Get out from under your parents' roof, join clubs, play sports, study abroad, figure out what life's all about. Like they want the education for sure, but the coming of age job is something they need. My 30-year-old that I described to you with 2 kids and a job and a lot of experience, they had all the coming of age they can handle. They had other jobs they needed doing. So we get very focused on, those are the 2 most important preliminary lessons. And then in the end, it was about talent. We don't produce in higher education, we don't have machinery, we don't produce widgets. We produce talent, and it takes great talent to do programs like these successfully.
Paul, it's great to see you again, and thanks for joining us this morning. And for colleagues in the room, I just want to acknowledge that Paul was very generous with his time. He spent an hour with my senior leadership team while we figured out how we were going to take forward our AI strategy and our AI acceleration work. And Paul's insights really shaped the approach we took. So thank you, Paul. And I think what we were really struck by was the laser-like focus that you brought to the needs of your learners and really identifying those learners in that learner segment that you were going to serve. And of course, there's a very strong equity mission behind what you're doing. And it's really about creating those life-changing opportunities for people. That kind of mission will align with many people in the audience today because it's a really shared driving mission of our sector. But that requires you to have a really good understanding of your external environment. So the learners, the lives they have, the challenges they face in an everyday way, the aspirations that they have for the future, and then shaping a service offering and delivery offering that meets their needs very, very precisely. So with that in mind, we have to turn our attention to the future and what's happening in the future, because that obviously shapes the challenges people are facing, but the aspirations they have. And so the question I really have for you, which is, from my mind, one of the big questions of the day, is how do you see AI transforming our economies and the world of work? And with that view in mind, what should we in university land do about it?
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. I'm here actually in San Luis Obispo, further up the coast from San Diego, and OpenAI is here, and Google and Anthropic. And a lot of the conversation with a lot of heads of HR, very large American corporations. This is the Business Education Roundtable. And the data is really clear. We're going to see massive displacement of jobs, of workforce from AI. The largest bank in Singapore last week laid off 4,000 people, replaced with AI, customer service, chatbots, and so on. If you take a look at the latest version of ChatGPT 3 Omni on performance test, it now outperforms 99.5% of software engineers. Think about that. And it's going to get better. So already it's better than the most elite software engineers. So Mark Zuckerberg of Meta, came out 3 weeks ago and said Meta will hire far fewer software engineers in the future. And I think if you take a look at where the sectors that will be most impacted, they're going to be information economy jobs, right? We're going to see this in finance, in banking, certainly customer service. We're going to see it in tech for sure. That's already softening in the US. There's a major realignment and rethinking about where those jobs will happen. And I will only speak in the US context. We are wholly unprepared. We are not having a conversation about the future of work and talent and how we'll rethink work and what jobs are most important. So when you think about your question, Theo, about universities, I think in the short term, we have this challenge of preparing our faculty and giving good guidance to students who all the surveys show are using, at least in the US, 90% of students are now using AI, at least some of the time. They're desperate for good guidance from faculty and from their institutions, and they're largely not getting it. In the medium term, I think you have to arrive at your theory of work. The one I gave you is a pretty radical one. There are people who would give you a more moderate, right? They would say, for example, McKinsey, I think was, 60% of jobs won't go away, but they will have significant reskilling. What's required of you will look very different. The World Economic Forum tends to have a little bit more dramatic thought of job loss and so on. But whatever your theory is about the future of work, whatever you're looking at for data, you've got to revisit your portfolio of offerings. You've got to ask yourself, for all of your majors, what's going to be required of my students if these jobs are around? And I think you have to ask, in some cases, will these jobs be around? Is this a major that still makes sense? I wouldn't put a lot of bets on accounting. I think accounting is going to be one of those things that actually absolutely gets transformed by AI. So if I have a big business school with a big accounting program, I'm going to start thinking about what does that look like in 3, 4, 5, 6 years? And we'll see enormous backlash, and we'll see lots of attempts to sort of arrest the speed of change. So the Hollywood writers' strike was very much a fight about AI and its impact on that industry. But we're going to see this flow through job after job. So I'll give you a little bit of a more optimistic view of how this plays out. So David Autor is a really terrific labor economist at MIT. He thinks AI could reinvigorate middle-class jobs. And the example he uses are nurses. And what his belief about AI is it's going to make very expensive and rare or scarce expertise now available to anyone. So hold that notion for a moment. So then he says, and at least this is true in America, it takes 10 years and millions of dollars to train a physician. We don't have enough of them. Even if you're privileged, you wait longer and longer to see a doctor. Now you could take a nurse in a rural area who has all the foundational skills. They know how to put a PICC line in. They know how to repair a broken limb, all of those things. They have the emotional skills we often wish our doctors had more of. We tend to like our nurses, at least in America, maybe not true in Australia. We like our nurses better than our doctors. And now at their side, they will have the highest, best medical expertise that you would get from a physician at the Mayo Clinic or Cleveland Clinic or Mass General. And nurses get paid pretty well. They're good middle-class jobs in America. They start at $130,000 a year. And you could fix a pretty broken medical system if you flooded it with well-trained nurses. A lot faster to train, a lot less expensive than doctors, and we can make real progress. So he's got a bit of an optimistic view. I would sort of expand that a little bit further and say, I think, and this will not happen overnight, I think we will see the huge displacement in information age jobs and a shift to what I would call care economy jobs. So again, I'm only going to talk about this in the American context. We have a broken K-12 system. We need to flood it with amazing teachers, coaches, social workers, counselors, and so on. Jobs that AI can help, but can't do. We have decimated our mental health care system in America. We use our prisons as mental health care systems now. We need to rebuild our mental health care system with psychologists, counselors, and so on, social workers. AI can help, can't do that job. And I can go down sort of sector after sector, which are all about human jobs. In today's economy in America, we don't like to pay for those jobs. We don't support those people well, and we don't give them much status. But in a world where human work, the work that includes empathy, navigating difference, people feel pretty fulfilled by them. They help our community. They make people better. When we offer good mental health care, good K-12, good teaching, psychological counseling, et cetera, the world gets better. So my optimistic view is that we will see this flip, that we will have to see this flip. And I can come back to why I think that's not as impossible as it sounds later on if you like Theo. But I'm in the camp that thinks universities now have to prepare for a workforce that's going to go through tremendous change. Maybe not in the next 2 years, but way more than we think in the next 5 to 10. By the way, I have to add one for anyone in the room who's from the humanities, which is my background. This is your day, because the qualities that we associate with human jobs in the future, sense-making, empathy, and so on are qualities we tend to associate with the humanities. And I was giving a version of this talk in Peru to a whole group of Latin American presidents. Many of them are Catholic priests because the Catholic Church has a very large higher ed presence in Latin America. And I turned to the priest like, guys, this is your turn with questions of what does it mean to be human? Existential questions of what does it mean to be human? What are we about? What is society for? These are the questions we're going to be forced to grapple with, I think.
Well, I'm glad you touched upon.
I mean, it's going to be ugly for a while.
It's great you mentioned it will impact on the future students' career, whether, how do we create jobs suitable for the future Gen Z of their jobs. But for the universities, we also consider, for example, the ethical dilemma we have in the university environment. How do we ensure the equity reinforced in the university in the context of creating the AI-first university? So what do you think are the biggest challenge in creating an AI-first university, either in Australia or in the US? What do you think?
Sure, and I'm always careful to say I can only speak to the context I know best, which is the US context. So first of all, in the US, we already have an inequitable higher ed system. It's undeniably so. If you take a look at who goes, who doesn't go, who drops out, who gets served, the reality is if you are a Black American with an undergraduate degree, you still would get paid less than a white American with a high school degree, right? Like the inequities are baked into our system. And to the extent that we have loaded students with more and more debt because there's been a cost shifting from the government, from the state to the student, we've made it more equitable still. And now, of course, in the US, as you probably watched, we're under full assault from the Trump administration, which includes an assault on equity, DEI. We can't even use those phrases anymore. So let's start with where we are and then ask the question, does AI exacerbate the problem or can it solve the problem? And of course, the answer is it could do both depending on how we use it and shape it. The work that I'm doing today with a new company called Matter in Space is very much about trying to post amazing teaching through AI to people who don't have access to good education, to good teachers. And in that sense, if we can do that at radically affordable rates, then we start to create some equitable alternatives or options to a system that isn't equitable today. I think that's an important piece. There are also questions, obviously, of algorithmic bias, cultural bias, how LLMs are trained. I'm sure this is something you all are thinking about in the United States. John Passmore is doing, training a new LLM called Latimer AI, and it's trained on a lot of the information sources from Black Americans, Black American culture. So from the Harlem newspapers and others, and they're moving into indigenous cultures now, which is much more complicated as he's explained to me. But I think there are things we can do. And for example, with what we're building, we're training in Mexico and in Rwanda to, again, train our models on cultures different than the dominant North American. I think we have to be very thoughtful about that as well. But, what we have seen is that AI has lifted the performance and capabilities of people who are often under-resourced. So if, I'm focusing on teaching, of course, but if you think about the research mission of universities, now our researchers are superpowered. If you have followed, for example, the work of DeepMind on protein folding, I mean, this is miraculous stuff. This is stuff that researchers worked on for decades, teams of researchers, and DeepMind did it in a day, right? So now we can ask much more interesting questions. But today, if you're an individual scholar or researcher in a small institution with not a lot of resources, you've just been superpowered. You can do things that your colleagues at much better resource institutions can do. In like fashion, I think we can use AI to provide tremendous supports to students that might be scarce or hard for us to fund because we can deploy AI in really powerful ways.
Great. And I think you touch upon so many different aspects: teaching, research, ethical consideration, equity. If you consider all of them as Lego set, for example, for Simon, for university just to start to explore AI in education, what are the first steps they should take? What are the priority in your list should be start with?
Yeah. So there's a book that influenced our thinking at Southern Hampshire University, and I'm still there. It's called Power and Prediction. It's out of the University of Toronto. Highly recommended, very readable. And what the authors, and they published it just before ChatGPT hit the scene, but they argue that all organizations will deploy AI across the enterprise in ways that have tremendous impact on productivity. And I suspect you all are doing that. I know Theo's doing that at La Trobe. And we lots of easy examples. Like I see this in marketing, I see it in just administrative back office. We now, our learning design team at Matter in Space, my new company, have said to me that first we were thinking, we still have to curate content because we don't trust LLM. They're hallucinating, personalized to an individual. Okay, then we can concentrate on knowledge graphs or knowledge maps. Think of this as curriculum laid out in detail. And now with reasoning models, we can use AI to do that. So much so that I was talking to the head of Amazon's career choice program and saying to her, we're at a point now where they could tell us on a Monday the specs for a new program, and we could enroll students on Friday. Now, compare that to the pace of curricular development in a traditional university. I look at my own at Southern Hampshire University, where we employ scores and scores of instructional designers, content experts, assessment experts, and so on. I can reinvent the business model. I can reinvent that university. It's really, really hard. It's reinventing your university. Like, what am I going to do with all those people? Do you want to be the person who lays off 200 instructional designers? Probably not. So existing universities are going to have their struggle, but I do think we're going to see a whole host of new providers who are operating in very different business metrics. But if you're a university, go back to the book, you should be playing with this across your enterprise. Have a little skunk works group. Doesn't have to be big and it doesn't have to be expensive. And your job as a leader is to kind of protect them from the incumbent organization and give them permission to be bold and crazy. Because you don't necessarily have to use anything they come up with, but ask them to be radical. Like, give them a challenge, like invent the provider that would put La Trobe out of business. Right? Theo can say, I want you guys to figure out, like, if you were young entrepreneurs, I got 4 of you working on this, you got limited resources, what would you do to put us out of business? Like, that's a great question. And then let them loose. And what you have to do is protect them from the incumbent organization, which will hate the fact that they're asking that question and working on it. But there are people out there asking themselves that question. Better to disrupt yourself and manage and shape your future than have someone else do it for you or to you. That's my philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the insights, Paul, that we took away from that meeting we had with you. And our AI Acceleration Task Force, which is a small group, has a mandate to push envelopes. But I think one of the things that I've been very grateful for is the leadership across the university has actually embraced that. But I think that mindset's important. Let's just shift gears slightly, though, and again, back to the external context. What's really striking among the Trump administration, there's a big long list of things that are striking about the Trump administration. But one thing that is quite interesting is, how Trump has really embraced AI. He sees an opportunity here, ironically, to create soft power in the United States using AI while he's busily burning all of the existing soft power. But that's behind the Stargate announcement. That's behind reversing all of the regulation that the Biden administration was about to bring in. The Trump has, through executive orders, has just junked it all. And so he wants to liberate AI and drive AI right through every aspect of the United States business sector. And interesting, if then in Europe, you've got a slightly different story, obviously, of heavy regulation, but still large investment. But as we think about it, here we've got an audience of people from ed tech and from universities and from other education providers. And so what are your thoughts about the role of government on the one hand, but also the role of industry in helping universities embrace AI and make that transformation?
Yep. I think of 3 approaches to AI. China will use AI for the good of the state, quote unquote, but it's essentially using AI as a surveillance tool and control. Europe is going to have a more balanced view. So an easy example of this is, European regulations that say, if you are using an image that has been reproduced by AI, you have to say so. It has to be labeled as such, right? So this is about combating misinformation and so on and so on. In the US, even under Biden was sort of the Wild West, and under Trump, no restrictions whatsoever. I mean, he's enthralled with the oligarchy, right? So Elon is happy to have him move this way, and they all bow the knee. If you looked at the inauguration pictures, all of the major tech companies were there. So we're gonna see on the. So here's how I think this plays out to go to your still more as possible. It's informed by the work of a Venezuelan British economist who I admire very much named Carlota Perez. If you don't know her book, if I could recommend only one book to you, I think, Theo, I recommended it to you. It's this one, Technological Revolutions and Financial Capital, which is the most boring title in the world. But the first third of this book is her look back at 5 paradigm shifting, revolutionary technological advents, right? And what she says is that when a society encounters such a technological paradigm shift of this magnitude, revolution in technology, it goes through a difficult transition. And she would argue that AI is not the revolution. Digital technology is the revolution. AI is phase 3. The internet, social media, so on, with all the problems, revolution. And what happens in that transition are the following things. So we're 40 years, right? We're 40 years, we're in the middle of it. And about the middle of it, here's what starts to happen. And tell me if this sounds familiar. Massive wealth inequity, the rise of monopolies. The big 7 tech companies now control 1/3 of the S&P 500 in the US. So rise of monopolies, a displaced population who's increasingly disaffected, the rise of populism. So last year, globally, in every democratic nation that had a national election, the incumbent government was thrown out, with the exception of Mexico and South Korea. And South Korea flips 2 months later. So let's just call it Mexico, right? Populations, whether it was a left or right-leaning government, are unhappy. It's when you see dictators and strongmen emerge, and it's when you see wars. Like, does it sound familiar? I mean, that is where we are. We problematic ways. Like I'm pretty optimistic about the ways we can use AI in education, but we weaponize it, right? Human beings have never created a technology or a tool that we didn't both use for good and for bad. And historically, when that's happened, the state has to step back in. And she has a very interesting framing of this question, which is when the state steps back in, it has to answer a new question, or a question that's been old but has to be answered anew. And the question is, what constitutes a good life for our people? So the example she would use is, in the last big revolution of this kind, we found ourselves in a very similar time in the early 20th century in America. We were in the Gilded Age, massive wealth inequity, massive rise of monopolies. This was the age of Carnegie and Rockefeller and so on. Rise of populism, Communist Party of America filled Madison Square Garden, disaffected population. Then, of course, it broke. And it broke. If you had told people in 1935 starving and there were no jobs and so on, if you had said, hey, in 20 years, 2 decades is not a long time in the societal change. In 20 years, there's going to be a thing called the suburbs, and it won't be unusual for you to own your own home instead of living in a multifamily unit, and you'll have a car in your driveway, and access to higher ed will be much broader than it is today, and you'll only pay a small portion of your budget for food, and you'll eat foods at time of years that you never thought you could get. People would have thought you were a lunatic. There was no version of that future that they could envision. And I think this is where we are today. I think we're struggling to figure out the question, what will be a good life? How will we answer that? And universities have a critical role to play in that debate, in that discourse. We have a responsibility to help answer that question. And I think, as I said, things have to break. So what you would also say, and this is the bit sobering part, supposed to say this for after lunch, is that really it was World War II that broke everything. But in 1935, FDR and the state started to answer the question in America. He said, being old shouldn't equal being poor. So we're going to invent something called Social Security. You shouldn't have to work 80 hours a week in order to feed your family. So we're going to have a 40-hour work week, right? All these things that started to say, life has to look better for our people. And then the war was the final breaking point. And the new American state stepped in and it looked very different right up until Ronald Reagan. And it was a sort of golden age for the US. I think, what you would say is it's easier to rebuild and answer that question after the earthquake, but you have to survive the earthquake. And right now we're in the earthquake.
Paul, I love the fact that notwithstanding what we're talking about this morning, we're talking about the work of significant scholars and even great books. So I think it's great to see that reference. Susan, I wonder if we shouldn't go straight to questions because we just have a few minutes left. So perhaps we go to take a couple of questions that people have.
Sure, I might come and join you, and I think I'm being heard. An overwhelming response on Slido. I acknowledge that many of them were asking when's the live stream starting. I'm delighted that it now has. My apologies to anyone that's inconvenienced, and my reassurance to everybody that a recording of what anyone might have missed will be made available to you at a later stage. But my apologies that there was some disruption in that. Of more substance for the moment and here now, a really great question that came forward was that given we're looking at such a huge upheaval in workforce roles, this was, I think, asked when Paul made his call for the future of the humanities and of nursing and of other vocations like that. But more broadly, Paul, and to both of you in talking with Paul, given we're looking at such a huge upheaval in the workforce roles, how would we as a higher education sector show leadership in helping our society navigate that change?
So one is, of course, we are institutions filled with scholars and thinkers and people who help inform the public discourse. And again, I will only say this in the US, that discussion is not happening. Like, we need our social scientists, we need our scholars talking about the future of work, not simply relying on large corporate entities to tell us what that should look like. I hate hey, you won't lose your job. You lose your job to somebody who can use AI. It's like, no, you lose your job. Like, it's bigger than that. Like, that would maybe for a short time, but like, you have to start thinking seriously about what the future of work looks like. And I think we have a responsibility. And certainly nature abhors a vacuum. Let's dip into that conversation. Let's lean in and start doing and introducing the hard work. It's very hard for the US to do that right now in our higher ed because we feel under assault. Everyone's just trying to keep their head down. But we should be in that conversation. I think we need to be having that conversation internally. How are we thinking about what we do? And then I think I'm informed here by the work of Chris Dede at Harvard. What AI, we have to grapple with the fact that we will now live alongside a kind of intelligence that surpasses ours in many areas. And certainly an alien intelligence, and that it's different than ours. And I love James Bridle's book, if you haven't read it, called Ways of Being, because he is a philosopher and a technologist, and he argues that we've always lived alongside other intelligences. We just don't recognize them because they're not ours. If you've read the wonderful book In Search of the Mother Tree, what we now know is that the forest has a kind of sentience. We don't recognize it as such, but it's almost undeniable. And the research on animals is telling us the same. If you know the book An Immense World, which is a marvelous book that talks about animal intelligence in a way that we have a new appreciation for. So anybody who actually prefers their dog to most of their family and friends knows what I'm talking about. Like, right? You have this relationship, you live alongside another kind of intelligence. So we'll have this other one that is an extension and a sort of superpowering of our own cognitive mind. We'll have a genius TA or a genius assistant at our side. But we're going to have to grapple with, as Chris Dede would say, is that alien intelligence is going to be a lot better than your physician, for example. And then we have to start asking the question, then what does it mean to train a caregiver in healthcare? So I'll just do this really quickly, but if you come into the doctor's office presenting symptoms, the diagnosis is a prediction, right? Which is, this is what I think is going on, and we'll order the test to confirm it. And then the prognosis is a prediction. This is what I think how it's going to play out given what we know about you. And then the sort of, treatment plans are predictions. This is what will work best. AI is better at human beings than all three of those things already. In fact, there's research that shows if you put a human in the loop, if you're one of those people who say, I can accept that, but I want my doctor to look at the results. The research suggests that they actually degrade the results. Your doctor will mess things up, so don't trust your doctor, right? So if that's the case, what I think we really want is to train our caregivers to do the thing we wish our surgeons, our doctors would do more of, which is, hey, Theo, this was a tough diagnosis. Tell me about the conversation you're going to have with your family tonight around the dinner table. Tell me about your support system. Tell me if you're part of a faith community. Tell me about how you think about questions of quality of life. Tell me about how you want me, your caregiver, to be with you, alongside you in the decisions that will be ahead of you now. How do you want me to be your guide and coach in this? Those are very human conversations that Chris Dede would say, it's about judgment and wisdom, and AI is not good at that. And the human jobs I talked about, the jobs of caregiving and raising children and mental health, those are judgment and wisdom and empathy jobs. And the best teachers we ever had, I was biting my hand at a session at this conference I'm at because someone asked the technologist on stage, the AI folks, what will the best teacher, the teacher of the year, look like in 3 years? And the answer is, it's exactly the same as it's always been. And it's not about the teaching. The best teachers, and you know your best teachers, I can name Mr. Schlafman in 6th grade, Mrs. Collins in high school, Dr. Heinemann in college. They're the ones that transformed my life. And it wasn't because they were really good at knowledge transfer. It's because they knew who I was as a human being. They made me feel like I mattered. They kicked me in the butt when I was slacking off. They raised my sights. They helped me dream bigger dreams. And if I ask audiences all the time, you know your teachers. You could name them the way I named my 3. How many did you have on average? I can only see a corner of the audience right now. But if you hold up your hand, if you're on the left of the stage, looking at the stage, I can see a gentleman with a brown jacket and a white shirt. How many of those teachers did you have? If you raise your hands and hold them up, the average is 3. 3, you have 3, like me. So I would say when we think about what does it mean to train our caregivers, it's going to be in distinctly human things. And when we think about what great faculty will look like in the future, I think the challenge will be for university faculty, not about their research function, but when I talk about teaching, I think the model is going to be the flipped classroom on steroids. I think AI is going to do the knowledge transfer outside of the class. I think it's going to do the tutoring. I think it's going to do the wellness supports. I think it's going to do a whole lot of things. And when you have time with human beings, your students in a classroom, it's not about teaching them stuff. It's about enriching them, curating community, helping them, checking in on who's doing well, the distinctly human things that we remember about our best teachers. And that's I think, the central challenge of how universities have to rethink the function of what we do.
Paul, I think you have provided a perfect note on which to end the discussion. I want to thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you for your insights. I'm sure you will have seeded lots of discussions that are going to be ongoing today, but really terrific to end on a positive note. We will get into the other stuff later on after lunch. But thank you so much indeed. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure with my colleagues. Thank you, Susan. Bye-bye all.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you to Theo and Susan. Please give them a round of applause as well for leading that fireside chat.